Oh, well, hello, and thanks so much for waiting so patiently in the wings there for us to get started. Hello, welcome, and thank you all for tuning in and joining us for our first ever Oceanographic Roundtable discussion. It's great to see such a robust audience join us for this online event. This is the first in a new series of weekly roundtable events, and it's a chance each week for you guys to join us at Oceanographic as we dissect and dive into some of the biggest headlines across the ocean news and ocean storytelling space. We are, of course, kicking things off today with a discussion centered around the issue of UK sewage pollution crisis. It's a topic that has been, if it wasn't before, brought crashing onto all of our radars since the release of Channel 4's three-part docudrama, Dirty Business, last month. This itself is a decades-long campaign that has found renewed momentum and, dare I say it, national outrage ever since the series told the stories of those individuals that were deeply impacted by it. And let's be completely honest, the nefarious activities of the UK's private water companies that have been evading accountability for their behaviours for some time. On this maiden outing of the Oceanographic Roundtable, I am very grateful to be joined by a wonderful lineup of some of the UK's keenest minds and forethinkers when it comes to the crisis that has for too long been plighting our rivers and seas, and everyone who joins and everyone who enjoys and everyone who depends upon them, which of course is everyone. Our guest speakers this afternoon straddle a trifecta of perspectives on the issue, spanning the academic, the environmental charity sector, and the campaign sectors. So allow me to make some introductions as we get right into the weeds of a topic that has ignited imaginations and attitudes, and the demand for our government and policymakers to do better by the environments we want to enjoy. I will introduce them in order of how our guests appear on my screen and when they pop up on yours. So guys, when you do join, give a little wave to aid our audiences tuning in at home or in their offices or wherever you may all be tuning in from as they all get to know you. We have Simon Browning, Monitoring Technical Lead at the Rivers Trust. Simon Browning, hello Simon. Simon Browning is an Environmental Monitoring Specialist and Monitoring Technical Lead at the Rivers Trust, the umbrella body supporting river conservation and organisations across the United Kingdom. In his role, he provides technical leadership on river monitoring and data collection, helping local rivers trusts and community groups gather and interpret evidence about the health of river catchments. How does that all sound, Simon? All good so far?
Yeah, sounds like me.
Perfect. We're also joined by Professor Gwyn Bevan. Gwyn Bevan is Emeritus Professor of Policy Analysis in the Department of Management at the London School of Economics and Political Science, specialising in healthcare performance, resource allocation, and public policy. He is a former head of Department of Management and author of How Did Britain Come to This? Gwyn, how was that?
That was good. I mean, you can download my book for free as well.
And a plug as well.
Yeah.
We should put the link in the chat actually at some point.
Okay, right, yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much. And finally, we are joined by Louise Reddy. Louise is a policy officer at Surfers Against Sewage, the UK marine conservation and campaigning charity dedicated to protecting oceans, rivers, and blue spaces. She joined the organisation in May 2022 and works within its policy team to amplify the voices of communities affected by pollution and influence decision makers in government and industry to enact stronger environmental protections. How's that, Louise?
That sounds like me as well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and for joining this discussion. I, by the way, am Rob Hutchins, community editor here at Oceanographic, and my skin in the game is that I have watched the docudrama and I felt incensed with anger and a desire to drive impact in the small way that we can here at Oceanographic. So thank you to all of our guest speakers and thank you to everyone tuning in for joining us and enabling us to do just that. Now, the purpose of this kind of roundtable is to really offer you guys tuning in the chance to ask questions and feel a part of this conversation too. So please do ask your questions throughout the next 30 minutes of chat, and we will do our best here by assistance of our production team who are sat off camera, and we will do our best to get those questions asked for you. Whether or not they'll be answered is another matter, but community involvement is very much the name of the game here. So, shall we set the scene? This all, of course, comes off the back of the recent Channel 4 docudrama Dirty Business, which doesn't just follow the stories of the individuals and families that were deeply affected by the sewage crisis that has blighted the UK's waterways for the last few decades, but the stories of those responsible for bringing this scandal to light by trawling through the data and exposing the activities of various water companies across the UK, which is essentially releasing untreated raw sewage into our rivers and coastal areas. So perhaps we can then start with, by giving a bit of detail on this one, actually, Louise, and we can start with yourself. If you could just help us set the scene and tell us what the story is here and what was Surfers Against Sewage, what's the involvement been like from you guys since the very start?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I'm assuming most people tuning in have seen Dirty Business, but if you haven't, it's a 3-part docudrama about the sewage crisis that we're facing, and part of what's covered in the docudrama is it follows 2 campaigners, Peter and Ash, from Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, who are a local campaign group. They've done some amazing work in revealing some of the horrific truths behind what's going on in the water industry. But it also covers some really horrific sickness cases, and in one case, the really sad death of a young girl, Heather Preen, who went on holiday to the Devon coast with her mum and family, and unfortunately passed away. And so our involvement really has been for a long time trying to champion those sickness, those people who've experienced sickness, and we've been working with Heather for quite a long time to try and make sure that we can get the voice of Julie, Heather's mum, to make sure that we can share what's going on with the sickness and spread awareness and make sure that people know that it's not just having a smelly beach, but there's so many sickness impacts of sewage pollution, from a day off work for some people, and also the unfortunate death of Heather and sickness of many other people. So we've been working with the producers to make sure that they cover it really sensitively and have the right information to make sure that they know what's actually going on in terms of the impacts on public health and also just the problem as a wider piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, if there's anyone in the audience that hasn't watched it yet, I really do compel you to go and watch that after this, because it really does put those individual stories right at the heart of this, and the way that it conveys that emotion and it gives it a face. It gives this national crisis this face and this emotional heart. And actually, I came away feeling a whole roller coaster of emotions. Starting from just deep upset, because it is devastating, the story there, but also just this rage. And I knew that I was angry beforehand, but having watched it, I never knew that I was this angry, and actually I hadn't been angry enough. So I felt really compelled to take action. And then obviously it's a 3-part series, and by the 3rd part you've got this call to action, and you start to feel emboldened and, dare I say it, empowered, and driven to take the effective actions, or just put this on the radar actually and engage with these conversations, I think. So just before we go any further, congratulations to you guys at Surfers Against Sewage for the part that you've played in bringing those stories to life and platforming this. So let's jump to you, Gwyn, and to ask a question about why have water companies actually been able to repeatedly discharge raw sewage without facing any real consequences?
Well, it's a massive regulatory failure. I mean, if you, this unsurprisingly features in my book, basically. So there's this bizarre thing, and it featured in the documentary, that in 1989, this is a true hubris of the Thatcher government at that time, thinking you could make a market work where water and sewage is well known to be a natural monopoly. So if you do learn elementary economics, you'll be taught this is a natural monopoly where you'll never have competition. I mean, to have competition between water suppliers, you'd have to have a coal view pipe network and reservoir network in competition, which would be ludicrously expensive. So, I mean, we recognise it's not great having a monopoly, even if it's public. If it's private, this, you immediately sort of see, you see a red flashing signal about this isn't going to be good. And the extraordinary thing, it's all part of the hubris of the time. It was Ian Byatt, who was the chief executive of Ofwat, the first regulator, recognized this is a classic case of market failure, but said, we, through regulation, will replicate the characteristics of a perfect market. And there was a report in The Guardian that pointed out that over 20 years ago, the Competition Authority was asked to judge whether it would be wise to let Southern Water be taken over by private equity. And in this report, he said, if you do that, Ofwat will lose regulatory control. They'd load the companies with debt and they'll discharge sewage into our rivers and seas. And yet the Competition and Markets Authority let that go ahead. This is, of course, what has now happened. And that report remains confidential, although it should have been released under the 20-year rule. And I mean, the documentary was just showing, I mean, what you hear about people involved in this is the cozy world in which the regulators, the consultants, and the water companies operate. And this shocking movement from the Environment Agency as a regulator into the water companies. So, and the whole thing about regulation being self-reporting of sewage. I mean, the whole thing's an absolute disgrace. But it's not, the point is, it's not just the Environment Agency, which that documentary exposed, but Ofwat also has let these companies load these with debt. So, you know, Thames Water's on the verge of bankruptcy. And we've got firms fighting over how much they'll charge to lend money to stop it going bankrupt.
It's crazy. Do you think that the documentary goes far to sort of illustrate this?
Well, it doesn't. No. Well, the thing is, it's great on the Environment Agency, but the thing is, there are three regulators involved in this, and they've all failed. So the Competition and Markets Authority should never have let private equity take over. I mean, when it was originally set up, they were all listed on the London Stock Exchange, and Ian Byatt could do benchmark competition using publicly available data. Once you let them get taken over by private equity, you don't get access to the data anymore. And you know, they're based in tax havens. They load companies. I'll stop you.
Well, don't. That's why we've got you on. Obviously, the level of insight that you bring to this. But to jump to you, Simon, to ask you a question. From your river monitoring experience, how widespread is the ecological damage caused by these sorts of discharges?
What we have with our sewage system in this country, it's vastly out of date. I mean, let's get things straight. The water industry, the sort of the water treatment infrastructure we had before privatization was way behind where it should have been. It suffered from a lack of investment for many years before that. And we've really seen, when you compare ourselves to our European partners, our investment in our water industry and our treatment works fall behind what is required to keep the system running. Essentially, what we've got is infrastructure designed for, you know, old-fashioned pollution, if you like, you know, the poo, the pee, the toilet paper, that is just not up to coping with the kind of the cocktail of chemicals that we now flush down our loos and that work into the system via the surface water outfall. So we've known for some time that sewage obviously is a massive threat to our river environments. We hear a lot about CSOs and storm discharges, which is where in supposedly extreme rainfall events, untreated or partially treated sewage is flushed into our rivers, if you like. That's terrible, but the evidence suggests that that's a tiny fraction of the damage, or a tiny fraction of the damage being done to our rivers is those storm overflows. Actually, the more worrying thing is it's the discharges that are going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that are having a real impact on our rivers. Something like 40% of our rivers are failing the Water Framework Directive, so that's failing their ecological health because of treated sewage effluent. Now, what we have exposed in the Dirty Business film is the worst of both worlds. The mitigating factor, if you like, with storm overflows is they generally happen in heavy rainfall. All right, that's happening a lot more often than it should, but at least there's rainfall to flush that sewage away. The treated discharges, you know, they are at least supposed to be cleaner. What they're exposing in Dirty Business is the discharge of untreated effluent, so that the worst of the worst, in conditions where the flows are low. So those receiving water bodies are no way able to cope with that. It might be warm weather, low flows, where the concentration then of raw sewage is so much higher. And that's why we see the catastrophic effects on the rivers that are exposed in that film, the dead fish and the very obvious effects. But treated sewage in our country is having a sort of a drip effect on the health of our rivers all the time. It's a complete myth that what comes out of a treated effluent is clean. It's cleaner, but it's by no means clean. And so when we talk about then people starting to swim in rivers, and certainly in inland waterways, the whole system was never designed to allow that to happen. And these sewage treatment plants actually thrive on multiplying bacteria. So that's how some of the pollutants are broken down. So you will find scores and very high levels of E. coli and other bacteria at the end of these sewage discharge pipes. They just don't have the infrastructure to take that out. I think something like 3% of the sewage treatment works in this country have UV disinfection, so actually doing some sterilization on the outfalls, and they will be ones that are very close to designated bathing waters, which, as we know, are by and large on the coast.
Yeah, wowzers. So there are many levels to this, levels upon levels actually, and some of those only scratch the surface in the documentary. But to make that link then from rivers to the seas, Louise, maybe we could ask you how does sewage, just give us a bit of insight as to how sewage pollution directly affects coastal communities and those recreational users like surfers.
I think we only really know the surface level of how coastal communities are impacted, right? We know that the basics, so we hear from surfers on a daily basis that are getting sick when they get into the water. Even the most prized beaches that we know of, whether that's our blue flag beaches, our bathing waters, places that are supposed to be protected for public health and people to access the water safely. Even in the summer months where they're the most popular, people are going on holiday, we see time and time again, people are getting sick from this. But we've had thousands of reports of sickness to us since we started asking people to let us know that they've been impacted by this. But it's not just the sickness, right? We're hearing from coastal communities that have been seeing discharges on a daily basis. Last year, for example, there was over 100 discharges into waterways every day. Imagine the impact that's having on a coastal community that relies on tourism to access, to make money for their town and to keep it as a thriving place. It's frankly awful, but it's also, it even goes wider than that, right? We've done lots of work with researchers around the impact on public health. For example, we've heard from researchers that surfers have 3 times more antimicrobial resistance in their gut microbiome, which is basically they're harboring this antimicrobial resistance. So if they ever get an infection and they try to treat it with antibiotics, it's far less likely to be treated effectively. But we're seeing all of these different things that are having impacts on coastal communities, and they completely build up. And it's frankly outrageous that we let water companies get away with it and wash their hands of the impact on public health. This is a massive issue that they're causing, and we need to see better from them on actually tackling the problem.
No, absolutely. And what's particularly mandating from my perspective is that, we're in a time period, we're in a time of our lives where we want to see people reconnect with their natural environments more than ever before. We need people to feel that reconnection, to be able to adopt this role of stewardship or guardianship and work to protect and conserve, ocean spaces, rivers, all our UK waterways. But this is a very real barrier. I was speaking to Charlie Clark, who was a triathlete who was impacted by sewage pollution, ended up with an infection. His story wasn't told in the documentary itself, but actually it's all part of the same mix. But he was telling me that actually that experience, now he had to go months of tests, ECG tests. It showed that he had a heart. It looked like he had a heart attack, but it didn't. It was this massive chest infection. But he is now thinking twice about going into UK waters, you know, and that's his sport, that's his hobby, that's his touch point with you know, with the sea. So it feels like a massive blow when we want people to feel more connected than ever and go and enjoy these spaces. You know, this is another hurdle to sort of overcome. But to ask you, Gwyn, what do you think about current regulatory structures then? Do they provide the right incentives for water companies to prevent pollution?
But the answer is,
I think, did you mute yourself because that was a blasphemous word there?
is that okay? Yeah, no. Yeah, well, it was just as well. Actually, can I share my screen? I just wanted to show a fine by the Environment Agency.
Go for it. If you've got the,
can I do that?
You have the. I think you have the ability.
Yeah, where is it? Shares. Oh no, where?
There's a little icon at the bottom that looks like a screen.
Yeah, it seems to have disappeared. I can't. It doesn't.
Well, I'll tell you what. If there's a link to it, we can pop that in the chat, maybe.
Okay. Well, I'll. Yeah. Okay. Never mind about that. The thing is that I thought, you know, the whole thing that the Dirty Business showed. I thought, you know, the thing about Dawlish and that tragic case of the girl who died. It's not just the regular, but the inquest itself, you know, just didn't call out the water companies. I mean, the evidence that was presented, of course, it's in the documentary, but it seemed to be overwhelming that the water companies to blame. And what I was hoping to show with my thing, but wait a minute, is this share screen? Oh, share screen. Here we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go to, can I go to? Oh, I always have this problem with the technology. This is it. Can you see that?
No, we can't.
Oh, well, never mind. It's not good.
If there's a link to it, maybe we can chat that.
Yeah, okay. I'll send it. Anyway, basically, the thing is that the fines that you've got. I mean, the fine that the Environment Agency made against Thames Water was £76 million. And Macquarie at the time, who was responsible, took out £12 billion. It was £8 million in debt and made £4 billion in investment. So the thing is that these fines, they're just rounding errors. I mean, the companies won't notice them. You know, there's a recent fine for the company that couldn't supply water to Tunbridge Wells for about 10 days. And I think that was fined £20 million, and it got a debt of £1 billion. But again, none of this features at all. So you just got, it's just, you know, it's just ineffective. You've got to, I mean, and there is this issue about the only obstacle it seems to be for public ownership is it's argued it would be too expensive to buy out the shareholders. But I mean, it seems there's a cheap way of doing this, which is to fine them such huge fines that actually they go bankrupt, then we take them over, and that's what they deserve.
Yeah, it's stunning. It's stunning. I smirked when you mentioned the Tunbridge Wells one because we have personal experience of that issue here in the Oceanographic office, with one of us being based in Tunbridge.
Oh God!
Out of water for 10 days, and actually, it's it's so telling us to, you know, try give up water for that long.
Oh yeah, horrendous. Yeah. Well, it's not what you expect in a civilized country, is it? Really, it's just
no, absolutely not. No, Simon. To ask you then, where do you think government monitoring and reporting systems, where do they fall short in detecting river pollution?
Well, actually, it ties back to what you were just talking about with the fines there. I remember a case not so long ago, Thames Water were fined £96 million for routinely under-treating sewage, if you like, for a period of 10 years. But it was reckoned that they saved way more than that in terms of the saved costs of not treating that sewage. It's quite expensive to treat sewage. You pump stuff around, you know, lots of processes going on. So if you can drop the amount of sewage you actually treat, you save a lot of money. And they were able to do that over a period of a long time, banking on the fact that they wouldn't get caught. And if they did, they'd still, you know, the fine would still not be more expensive than the savings they'd made. So what came through in the documentary was this kind of definitely this move to operator self-monitoring. Now, as Gwyn was saying, you know, if you have what is basically a natural monopoly, you need a strong regulator to then sort of abdicate that and give that responsibility for testing the quality of your discharge back to the water companies was a massive mistake. I actually worked at the Environment Agency at that time. I wasn't, involved in those decisions. I was doing sort of monitoring R&D at the time, and it really, that scene in the film really gelled with me, because people all over the Environment Agency were saying, "You what? You're going to let them mark their own homework?" It just didn't make sense, and people all over the agency were saying, "We know exactly what will happen." And effectively, what was that, 10, 15 years ago? This is now where we've arrived at, over that kind of that regime being in place, with successive governments who haven't got to grips with it, who've let that go, so that the water industry is so confident in the fact that it can get away with it, that they start to build it into their business models. So I mean, we hear now that operator self-monitoring is to end. I'm not clear on what I think they're calling the replacement open monitoring. We'll see where that goes. Some of you will also have heard about Section 82, which is part of the new Environment Act, which means that, and this is a partially a massive success for kind of public engagement. This is now, what was it, 2021? A massive public outcry. I think over 30,000 people signed a petition or emailed their MPs over one weekend in response to a call from Rivers Trust and Surfacing Against Sewage to do something about monitoring or the environment. And the Environment Act came in, and what that's going to stipulate is that water companies then will have to do continuous monitoring. So there's sensors in the river, upstream and downstream, of all sewage discharges. So again, massive cost to be brought in over the next 10 years. We're talking tens of billions of pounds. You and I will be paying for that as it stands through water bills, essentially to provide a much closer eye on what's going on. But I mean, that still misses the point. These sensors monitor some fairly basic things, oxygen, important, oxygen, ammonia, pH, turbidity. They don't measure anything of the viruses, the chemicals, the endocrine disruptors, all the hormones that are coming out of sewage treatment works. We really need, in my view, a comprehensive, independent chemical testing program of sewage discharges in the pipe. We need to know what's coming out. If you look at most sewage treatment permits, they only have to measure ammonia, suspended solids, maybe BOD, sometimes phosphate. That's about it. There's a very small number of chemicals they have to measure coming out of the sewage stream works. They do that themselves. They do it maybe 24 times a year. Some they kind of get reduced then for good behavior. So if they don't report a discharge exceedance, their monitoring can get reduced to as little as 4 times a year. That's absolutely ridiculous. It needs to be stepped up.
It's crazy. And look, we've got a really good question there from someone in the audience, Alan, who asks, what's the panel's best hope for true accountability then? So who would that be, and what would it look like? I think that's a good question for everyone, actually, but we'll start with you, Gwyn.
I think 2 things I wanted to say, really. I mean, the first is, I'll come on to the question in a minute, is what was striking, we were saying about the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office and dirty business. And they both put these outrageous scandals that have been going on for a long time in the public attention. But what I thought was so telling about the contrast between the two is, in the dirty business, they explained that the only 2 organisations able to bring private criminal prosecutions are the Post Office and the Environment Agency. Now, in the Post Office case, hundreds of postmasters were criminally convicted under evidence that they later knew was flawed. And they went to jail. 13 people committed suicide, at least, And yet, in this case, when you've got, the Environment Agency empowered to take criminal action against the water companies, they set the bar so high, it never happens, and there's this incredible contrast between the way some people who are vital pillars of our community are treated and these people who are the super rich who profit from our water supply. Anyway, I just start to get that off my chest. I feel a lot better now. Okay.
Good.
I think in terms of what we need to do, I mean, Kate Bayliss, who knows much more about this than I do, and I are at one agreed the only solution is public ownership. The problem you've got with the regulators, and the reason why the government's so gingerly stepping round this and not being serious about it, is because private capital wants a stable regulatory regime. So when they invest, they say, look, we made our investment and we understand the regulatory regime would be like this. If you change the regulatory regime, then we're going to hesitate about investing in you because this is much riskier than what we thought we were taking on when we set out. And the difficulty with that is there is no perfect regulatory regime. And often what we've been talking about is the complete incapability of our regulators to deal with this. Now, what they can do, of course, they can learn from what these companies are doing in the past and say, we're going to try and tackle that. But that's like generals fighting the last war. You've got these incredibly rich companies with very smart people who can outgame any regulatory system. So the whole idea of the Thatcher business was that we could, you know, as Ian Byatt believed, we can make good efficiencies in the market through regulation. It's just wrong. So for me, the only solution is public ownership.
Yeah. Go on, Louise, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, we also do lots of work on, or we've been really tackling this question over the past 4 years or so, I think. And we've come to a similar thought from Gwyn, and frankly it comes back to what we were saying before. At the moment, pollution is profitable, right? It makes you money, and that's why we're seeing a systemic issue across the UK, is because it makes money to, and it's cheaper to pollute and then pull all of that money out that you should have been putting and investing into infrastructure to pay to shareholders. And so what we're trying to say is that needs to stop. We need to remove this profit incentive. And so we think the government needs to look into actually restructuring the water industry and doing that to make sure that they remove this profit motive. We think there's lots of different ways it could be done. It could be done through producing not-for-profit companies and lots of different things. But frankly, the big piece that needs to be removed is that profit incentive to pollute. And there's obviously other pieces. There's also the regulation, as Gwyn's been talking about. But at the moment, if you watch the Channel 4 documentary, the decisions they're making don't make sense, right? You're like, why on earth would you do that? And it's because they don't have enough cash to deliver stuff. And so we need to make sure that the regulators, whoever they are, even if we do reshape the ownership models, actually are robust and allowed to actually monitor and do all these things. All of the self monitoring processes was just cash saving mechanisms, right? But we need to be strong and we need to be firm, and we need to make sure that water companies know and shareholders know that they can't just make profit with no consequences. And yes, we need certainty for investors, as someone was mentioning, but if that certainty comes at the expense of the health of rivers, of people that live in the UK, we need to make sure that they know that they can't get away with anything. They've been required to deliver a service, and first and foremost, they need to give that service to people.
Yeah, thanks so much for that response, Louise. And just to finish up, round up answering Alan's question there, Simon, can we get your thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I know that before privatization, our water industry was also in a terrible state. So I wouldn't sit here and say public ownership is a panacea that will solve all our problems. We are still going to need to invest a massive amount in our waste treatment network from somewhere. And, you know, as soon as it becomes a government-run thing, it's competing as it was before with, you know, health, with education, with defense, with various other things that are top of the list. So, I mean, it really needs, but having said that, I find it really difficult to see. I'm not an economic expert, but I cannot see at the moment how the private water industry will find anything like the investment that's required. It's neither incentivized to or able to. And so at the same time, it was really a massive failure, in my view, that the Cunliffe Review, which presented as this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to review how our water sector is working, didn't even look at privatization. It was not on the table. The government told it not to look at that, which is a massive mistake in my view. It should have really been closely looked at and examined, so we as public can start to make that decision through the choice of our politicians and our representatives effectively. And I think that's where I come to at the end of the day. This is a series of political choices that have been made that have got us into this situation. We still need to fight. We still need every one of us to make it known to our MPs that this is an important issue to us, so that when it comes to election time, we're putting the people in Parliament that will take that feeling through to implement policy. It's as simple as that in many ways. And with a lot of our environmental choices, you know, farming regulation is another one. there's no easy choices left. We've let it slide for so long that we're way behind the curve. So something drastic needs to happen, and we're going to need to make sure it's on the agenda.
Yeah, wonderful. We have a nicely timed link to the petition now, the Surface Against Sewage petition that's just popped up on my screen. I hope that's popped up for everybody tuning in as well. We've got a fascinating, really great question actually from Francesca, and there's a couple of questions that have just popped up. So, but I really want to ask this one that's coming from Francesca, who thinks that sewage and agricultural pollution of our rivers share so many similarities, e.g. who has power to enforce regulation, strong oppositional lobbying forces, profit incentives. How can we link these fights up together better? Louise?
Big question. I think a big part of what's going on, as you say, with agricultural pollution is poor regulation and poor joined up work with farmers and all of this kind of thing. We're seeing, and certain examples such as on the Wye, we're seeing this mass exploitation of rivers to deal with a problem that costs money but needs to be dealt with, rather than relying on the environment to take the hit. And so I think it's that seeing, we need to make sure that pollution isn't profitable, and that's something that we can do for both sewage and agriculture. And we need to work, particularly with agriculture, I guess, work with farmers and people that are operating to make sure they're aware. There's, I guess, the difference, we focus quite heavily on sewage at the moment, and a big part of that is because it's an easier fight, right? It's equally responsible for water pollution, but we know who the actors are, and it's a very easy piece to tackle in comparison. And so there's a huge piece that needs to be done with regulation, building people, and looking across the catchments of water systems, and making sure we're tackling all the pollution in different areas, seeing what's going on. There's an interesting piece of work being done by the government at the moment around regional water authorities. So that's looking at specific regions and making sure water is managed in a way that actually delivers for those regions, looking at where the pollution sources are and how it's being dealt with. But it comes back to the same thing, right? They need to actually have power. And at the moment, it looks like they're just going to be kind of a bit of a talking shop for these areas. And we need to make sure that there's someone independent, firm, and actually powerful to be able to hold local actors to account and make sure they take action. So I think part of it is ambition and making sure that we don't scare away from calling out polluters when they're delivering it. Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways we've got to do this, and it's probably not the easiest question to answer.
No, but thanks all the same, Francesca, for asking it. And actually, Simon, are there any thoughts from your perspective on this one?
I think the clue is in the question in a lot of ways. Rivers are that unique unifying force. They link the land, the uplands, and the oceans and the estuaries and all that in between. So, by looking at overall river health, and what's good for the environment and what's good for our sustainable sort of living alongside and with rivers, that gives us our goal, our sort of pole star to aim for, if you like. What we have not seen, certainly ever in my lifetime, but Brexit was an opportunity, if you like, to kind of reshape our agricultural policy around subsidies that put sustainable farming and nature and water friendly farming first, and we've totally dropped that ball. That was an opportunity that again, successive governments have just completely fumbled. We can do this. It just requires a bit of joined up government policy. It's the same with the water industry. Proper regulation would sort this overnight almost, and proper incentives and sort of regulation of farming that's sort of sensitive to small family farms and the large industrial farming units that we're starting to see increasingly, could sort it. But I think again the sort of the powerful oppositional lobbies is a really key point. The lobbies on behalf of those industrial farming systems and the supermarkets that have so much power in that system are really part of the problem. And if we can kind of get past that and put into place policies that are more holistic and more sensitive to our needs and the environment's needs, then that's the way to turn this around, I think. Again, so it does become, it's a political issue around making sure you make the right choices at the ballot box.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Simon. And look, I'm very conscious of the time and energy levels and your guys' time, so I don't want to be eating too much of that up. But we've got a great question here from Amelia that I really want to put to you, Simon. And it's, are there examples where rivers have fully recovered from repeated sewage pollution? And what enabled that recovery?
I think no is the quick answer.
Right.
But I mean, there was a massive program, I think it was called Clean Sweep, back in the sort of early days of privatization, where I was far too young to know all the details, but I live on the coast here in Cornwall. So I know that a lot of work was done on coastal outfalls that kind of took those short sea outfalls, if you like, and invested in long sea outfalls. So that made a big difference to a lot of beaches. But we haven't really tackled the problem wholeheartedly, because essentially it's just shifting it around from one place to another. The fundamentals haven't changed. The sewage treatment works are still where they ever were. What we flush down the toilets is still what it ever was, and even more sort of insidious chemicals in there. And so nothing fundamental has changed in that respect. What we also tend to see working in this sector is where water companies do make improvements, they're very keen to look at catchment management type things, which basically boils down to, we'll use some of our money to pay for nature-based solutions or to pay for farmers to stop doing some of the things they're doing, in return that we can carry on doing what we're doing with the sewage. So you might see some improvements. They're pretty piecemeal, I think, across the country. But it's that sort of diversion of stuff rather than really fundamentally attacking the cause. Sewage treatment hasn't fundamentally changed in 80 years, effectively, not in this country anyway.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. And look, as I say, conscious of the time, so just going to ask a couple of last questions of each of you before we sort of round up. So my question to you, Gwyn, is what lessons from other regulated sectors could we learn to help fix the sewage pollution faster?
Well, I think it's more about, I mean, the thing we teach our students is every surface has its own particular characteristics. So it's quite complicated to move regulation from one to another. I did work for the regulator of quality in the National Health Service. And we never believed that self-reporting was an effective way of regulate. That always seemed to us completely stupid, because the ones who are worst think they're doing absolutely fine. So it's absolutely terrible. I just wanted to, academics, they answer a different question from the one that you asked, so you'll have to bear with me while I do this. But I think that it was more that the issues raised by Simon earlier. And I think, he's absolutely right about the Cunliffe review. That was a missed opportunity just to put public ownership off the agenda and not to consider varieties of public ownership. We're the only country that's wholly privatized everything in the system, and no one else is going to do what we've done. And I think I take the point about public ownership. It's never a panacea. And Simon's absolutely right. There'd be a struggle to get capital investment into this. We do need to reform the way we organize private capital in public investment instead of using the private finance initiative. And that can be done. There are different ways of doing that. But I think for me, the key thing is what Louise said about what we've got. There's this great line in healthcare about every system's perfectly designed to get the results it gets. It's the theme of my book. And basically, the system we've set up is perfectly designed to get sewage in our rivers and seas. That's the problem we've got. And the reason is that it is exactly as Louise says, it's driven to make profit. That's what it's all about. So you've got the people pulling the strings, in a private equity company in Australia, who frankly can't be bothered about someone dying on a beach in Dawlish. That's not going to be on their agenda at all. And if we had public ownership, we wouldn't have, you'd have people there. I don't know. You don't want to go back to the golden days of the previous regional water authorities. But you get the sense that people running that were committed to doing the best they could under the circumstances. Whereas under this privatized system, you got people saying, the pictures that they had, there was that fly in the wall documentary of Thames Water. We've got these people struggling to do the best they possibly can with, of course, completely inadequate infrastructure. So having to let sewage out, and it's sort of, they're grieving over having to do that, but they've got no alternative. But they're within a system in which, you know, it's all designed to make them do that.
Mm. No, yeah, no, thanks for that. And thanks for answering that question that I never asked, but I wish I did. Really appreciate it. What was I going to ask you? I was going to ask actually, and let's just chuck it out there. Do we think that we've got the right people in place then, in government, in power, to make the changes that are needed?
No.
For everyone.
Not at all.
Not at all.
No, I think the evidence is to the contrary. We don't, you know, and this this current government has been very disappointing, I think, on that score. I think that's fair to say. Across the nature piece, you know, we hear Keir Starmer, you know, bashing bats and newts when that's really not the issue that's kind of at most people's top of their lists.
And Louise?
I would argue slightly differently in that I don't think we've ever had the right people at the top to do this, right? But what is clear is the public want it, and the public want something to happen. And I think that's really peaked with public interest and understanding on the issue growing with dirty business. And that's why, for example, we've got this petition that we've shared, and for others, it's not really down to the government. We've had in ahead of the general election, we heard from the public that they were going to vote around who was going to end sewage pollution, and they did, and that's what was promised to them. And so it's up to this government to deliver that, and we will continue to push them to make sure they do that, because it's not down to whether they're the right people, it's down to what the public want, and they need to deliver for the public, really.
Mm-hmm. And for all those, Louise, that are feeling sort of that same sense of incensed rage after watching this or hearing this conversation or seeing any of the campaign stuff that you guys have got going on around this, alongside signing the petition, what can people do to make a stand and have or feel like their voice is being heard?
So there's so many things you can do. Firstly, get to grips with what's going on in your local area, right? I think someone shared in the chat our Data HQ, which has got information which you can look into what's going on in your local area. There's monitors, thankfully, on all of these combined storm overflows around the UK, and you can see what's going on in the river down the road. If that upsets you and if it's polluted, you should get in touch with the people in power, whether that's your local MP. They need to feel the pressure on what's going on. You can write to your water company. It's the fact that anything you do, really, kicking up a stink in some form is what's going on across the UK, and what people in power need to hear so people take action. And so, yeah, sign the petition first, and once you've done that, look at what's going on locally, and then get involved with Surfers Against Sewage. We support people to campaign in their local area on lots of different ways, in whatever way you want to, but also the local Rivers Trust. There's many different ways, but get involved and campaign for your local area, because that's how we're really going to make a change.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, download the Surfers Against Sewage app as well. I downloaded it the other week. It's never been easier for me to get in touch with my local MP, and I actually received an email from him earlier this week, a very sort of I don't know, hat in hand sort of email response, actually, that was quite surprising about this local discharges. So, you know, that's another way. So yeah, get that app. I really recommend it. Look, guys, I really appreciate your time and your energy that you've given to this conversation, your insight and expertise. So thank you all for joining this, and thank you all for helping us bring this first one to life and to our audiences, which is we've retained them for the duration. So thanks to you guys all tuning in and watching this, and I hope learning from this and feeling compelled to act too. This is going to be a regular weekly series, Oceanographic Roundtable. So each week we'll be dissecting a different topic with a new panel of experts. So tune in next week to find out what that will be. And there should be a discount code popping up for our magazine, so check that one out. And also, Ocean Talks is our live version of this, which we're touring the UK currently. We're heading to Leeds later this month, and then next month we're going to Cambridge. So check out the Oceanographic website and find out more there. But yeah, just to finish here, thanks all of you for your time, and thanks for your insight, and thank you so much. Take care.
It's a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thanks for hosting the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.